Welcome back to Raised by Giants live discussion. Good to see everyone. Welcome everyone in the chat and any moderators and or channel members out there, and to anyone that's listening to the replay. Thanks for joining us. And if you're listening to the show on audio only, welcome. If you're watching on YouTube or X, be sure to follow the audio only podcast platform as a backup. You can set it to where you can just download the shows automatically and you'll be notified when a new show is posted. I like to listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm driving. So on Spotify, so makes things easier where you can multitask and listen at the same time. So follow the show on Apple Podcast, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts so you never miss a show. A Clockwork Shining, my latest documentary, is now available on Tubi. Anywhere you can download the Tubi app, you can now watch my documentary, A Clockwork Shining, on Tubi. So even if you've seen it already on Amazon Prime, watch it again on Tubi. I have the link pinned to the top of the chat, and it's also in the description. With that down, a warm welcome back to the show, the author of the amazing book, A Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, which was what first introduced me to our guest here today. He has a BA in psychology from Temple University, a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, 2 years in a PhD psychology program, retired licensed psychotherapist who worked for over 35 years with schizophrenic and psychiatric patients in state hospitals, state prisons, and hospital emergency rooms. Jerry Marzinsky, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm glad to be back with you again.
Yeah, Jerry, you've been on the show a couple of times, and your book is incredible. Your book is a page turner. Someone recommended it to me, and I just bought it off of Amazon Prime and just read it all in one setting. It's an incredible book, and it takes you through the history of these psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia and how they were dealt with in the past. And I want to kick this off with a question: is like, how is schizophrenia, how does that develop in somebody? Is this a hereditary disease? What's going on with this? How can people in turn get schizophrenia?
Well, there's a theory that there's a genetic link, but they haven't ever found one. So there's three ways that I know of. One is schizophrenic parents will treat their kids in an abusive way that paves the way for the voices to move over to them. Okay. Another way, the most prevalent way, is severe psychological, physical, and emotional abuse. I mean, you can't virtually talk to any schizophrenic who hasn't undergone one of those things. I mean, so it kind of breaks down the spirit. And there's two other ways. One is amphetamine. I've never seen more people go insane on amphetamine than when I was working in the psychology department of a big prison. There were hundreds of prisoners there who had gone insane on amphetamine. So they're feeling good. They're high. They get a lot done. They have a lot of energy before they crash, and then during their high, they start hearing voices, and they just write them off. Oh, they're just hallucinations. They'll go away when I come down, and they do. They might come and go away 10, 15, 25, 50 times, and then one day they don't. And they're with them for the rest of their lives, and they can't get rid of them. And they're just as psychotic as any of the paranoid schizophrenics in the state hospitals. Right? It doesn't go away. Right? And the third way is with Ouija boards. I've talked to several people who started playing with Ouija boards. They're not toys. They should be outlawed. And, they start communicating with some spirit at that time. And then that spirit moves into their head. So instead of having to use the Ouija board, they're just communicating with it with the voice in their head. Okay. So the psychiatric mafia says there's no cure for schizophrenia, that it's a lifetime life sentence, and that there's nothing you can do except take their toxic medications. That's far from true. There's a lot of things that can be done. It's not a life sentence. Um, but
Yeah, what's interesting is you're bringing up the medication aspect of this, and I've never told this story before, Jerry, but I had really bad insomnia for a really long time, and the doctor put me on this medication called Seroquel.
mhm.
And Seroquel is supposed to be in a small dose, a sleeping aid,
Yeah,
sort of like trazodone.
it's an antipsychotic. It's one of the earlier antipsychotics.
That's exactly what it is. So, after a while of taking this Seroquel that they were prescribing to me for sleep, I had some really strange things happen. Like, I would see things, I would hear things, and, you know, eh, I've never told the story before, but I think that it's important because we're gonna be getting into the spiritual aspect of this as well. And I had I'd auditorily heard. I know that you've heard of like mimics and like people like entities mimicking other people's voices. Sometimes they'll hear people mimicking their own voice like back to them or like family members' voice. Well, I was upstairs in the house that I was living in. I was the only one in the house. I had heard my family members yelling upstairs at me to come downstairs. Okay. This really scared me because I knew no one was home. Okay. No one was home. I'm hearing someone externally yelling to me to come downstairs. And the only thing that I knew was I had this crucifix and I grabbed the crucifix and I basically said in the name, this is going to sound wild, but I said in the name of, Jesus Christ, leave. And then it left. And then another one came and it mimicked another family member's voice. And I did the same thing. And then another one came. And then I was like, okay, this is going to be like 3 times. I'm going to have to do this like 3 times because three is like the magic number here is the Trinity number. And then I did it again. And then they went away.
Yeah, that doesn't sound strange at all. I've had patients at the state hospital tell me that when they read the 23rd Psalm, the voices reacted to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. You know, so the psychiatric mafia is saying that these voices are auditory hallucinations. They've done no research on it at all. They just declared, like the Egyptian priests of old, we hereby declare that they're auditory hallucination because that's what they look like. That's what they seem like. They've done no research on it at all. They haven't talked to the voices. They haven't asked the patients what the voices were telling them. And the 2 times I got caught by psychiatrists asking patients what the voices were telling them, both psychiatrists said, you either stop it or we're going to write you up. They said the voices are hallucinations. By asking the patient questions about them, you're reinforcing those hallucinations and you're making them worse. Based on what? Nothing except their egos. You know? So the voices, what I found, after decades on the front lines, is that these voices ran patterns. They ran fixed, consistent, repeatable patterns. Okay? And if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations, like the psychiatric mafia says, because hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. You can't predict what a hallucination is going to do or what it's going to say. They're different all the time for different people. These things are consistent, right? And I'm just going to go through a few of the first ones. They're consistently negative. They're always, you're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, you're ugly. People are plotting behind your back. Somebody's going to kill you. It's every rotten thing that you can imagine. They're telling these people. Right? So my first question was, what holds them on this consistent pattern? Why aren't they random like all other hallucinations? Why are they consistently negative? And what's holding them on that consistent track? Why aren't they random? But they're not. Okay. Now, if you go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, you go to articles, you will see a list of patterns that these voices run. So it's not like what the psychiatric mafia did. Well, what happened was Eli Lilly back in the 70s came up with this um, chemical brain imbalance stuff. So they needed an explanation for why their antidepressant drugs work. So they made one up. Oh, there's a chemical balance in the brain, and our drugs do something for it. They somehow fix it. You know, it was made up. It's totally made up for profit for their drug. Right? Then the universities began teaching it, and the other drug companies grabbed onto it. They said, "Oh yeah, all mental illness is caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain." All right? There's no proof for it. Matter of fact, they've disproven it several times already. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be, let alone what a chemical imbalance was. Now, if you don't believe that, any of you who go to psychiatrists, okay, they're going to tell you what you have is a chemical brain imbalance, and ask them, well, what's the baseline? How do you know what's out of balance by how much? What kind of tests are you going to give me to figure out what's unbalanced in my brain and what's not? Which of the 23 neurotransmitters or so are out of balance? They have no idea. They have no test. They have no objective test to measure what chemicals are out of balance in your brain. It's all made up. It's a fantasy. It's a fraud. And what they'll do is they'll just take a subjective guess as to what drug they should start with, what antipsychotic drug they should start with, and then they'll adjust it up and down. If that doesn't work, they'll try another one. That doesn't work, they'll try another one. They just keep going, going, going until they find one that they think works well. Now, none of these drugs cure anything. They don't cure depression. They don't cure psychosis. Right? All they do is tamp down symptoms. They have no idea what causes schizophrenia. Even though it's this chemical brain imbalance thing has been disproven, they're still advertising that, they change the wording a little bit. They go, oh, it's believed that schizophrenia is caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. Yeah. But they have no evidence whatsoever. Yeah.
Right, they just redefine the entire thing like they're like they've done with pandemics and everything else. The
Yeah.
what was really interesting whenever I was on Seroquel, which again, Seroquel was in low doses was supposed to be for sleep. That's what it was prescribed to me before, but in high doses, it's an antipsychotic, but it's marketed as an antipsychotic. But what this medication did to me was it basically dulled me out. Like it made it to where I couldn't even put sentences together. Like I couldn't gather my thoughts. It made everything super cloudy. I I was essentially like a zombie, like walking around like a zombie. This was around 8 years ago. And I was like, what is this medication doing to me? And it wasn't making anything better. It really didn't even help me sleep that much. It just kind of turned me. And then I was hearing these things. I was seeing things, Jerry. I
Yeah.
was literally seeing weird, strange, like entities. Like they were there and they were moving. It wasn't like that they weren't really there. They were there, they would move. I would wake up in the middle of the night and there would be something setting on the end of my bed. And people can say, oh, I'm just making stuff up. I'm not making this up. This legitimately really happened. Now, whether it had to do with the medication or if it was real, but it seemed very real when I was experiencing it and going through it.
No,
I
you
was
didn't
seeing
have those.
shadow people.
Oh yeah, you didn't have those symptoms before you went on it, though, right?
No.
Yeah.
Well,
So
maybe when I was a kid, I seen and experienced really strange things as a kid.
yeah, so
But
I wonder how much of that is actually due to the drug itself, because they don't do anything good. I mean, the side effects of phenothiazines, dizziness, drowsiness, anxiety, sleep problems. So it's weird they gave it to you, for insomnia because it causes phenothiazines that cause it. Breast swelling or discharge, changes in menstrual periods, weight gain, swelling of the hands or feet, dry mouth, stuffy nose, blurred vision, constipation, um, nausea, weight gain, dry mouth, blurred vision, dizziness, anxiety, headache, sexual problems, fatigue, tremors, increased swelling, lower alcohol tolerance, bleeding, lower sodium levels, vomiting, restlessness, muscle cramps, seizures, and it goes on and on and on. These are the side effects. And that's why most of these people go off of those drugs because they're not making things They don't, for the most part, they don't get rid of the voices. Right? They just weaken them. They lower them. They lower the volume. Okay. So here's the psychiatric mafia pushing this stuff on people, saying there is nothing else you can do. You know? And these patterns that they run, you know, one of the patterns is, like you mentioned, they're anti-religious. They don't like the Bible. They don't like people praying. They don't like them going to church. They become volatile if the person reads the 23rd Psalm or Psalm 91. They're anti-religious. So, what kind of hallucination is consistently anti-religious? If these things are hallucinations, like the psychiatric mafia says, you know, how can a hallucination be anti-religious? Right? And they're feeding these things to kids. I mean, they'll feed them to anybody who will take them. You know, but antipsychotics to kids, it's egregious. I mean, they're stabbing.
Antipsychotics and antidepressants. Another interesting thing that that I want to mention really quickly is that one of the first manufacturers of LSD in the United States was for the CIA. I'm sure you already know this, Jerry, but the first manufacturer of LSD for the CIA in the United States was Eli Lilly Company.
Oh,
Okay.
that's interesting. They're the same ones who made up the lie.
And they were the inventors of Prozac.
Yep. And that's where they made up that lie, that it was a chemical imbalance. They knew it was not right at the time, and they did it anyway. They pushed it for the sale of drugs, and they got away with it for close to 40 years before some biochemists caught up with them and said, we find no chemical imbalance of the brain in schizophrenics. There's none. Their brain chemically is not any different than anybody else's brain. So they got away with, first they blamed mothers, saying mothers did something to the kids that caused them to be psychotic. Then they blamed genetics until the geneticist says, we don't find a schizophrenia gene. So what they're doing is pushing it up into chemistry and genetics, where the average person can't see or see for themselves what's going on. Now, when you look at these patterns, the negativity, the anti-religious, the patterns I have on my website, you can see these for yourself. So anybody who has schizophrenic kids or works with schizophrenics, go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, and you'll see a list of patterns there that these things run. And you can see them for yourself. They're not hidden anywhere. These things run fixed patterns. They foster and create negative emotion. They feed off that negative emotion, and they drain the person. They they get louder after sunset. They get louder when ignored. I've heard psychiatrists say over and over again, just ignore them. They're hallucinations. Just ignore them. No, that they won't be ignored. They get louder. They foster self-destructive behavior. You know, and they're poisoning kids with them too. Right now, there's more than 7.2. Now, this is in 1971 statistics. More than 7.2 million kids on antipsychotic drugs or on psychiatric drugs. Over 622,000 of them are under the age of 5. Over 80,000 of them on ADHD drugs, which are amphetamines. Those are the drugs I told you that with enough of a volume will bring on psychosis. Over 38,000 of them are on antidepressants with the symptoms that I just told you. Over 85,000 of them are on antipsychotic drugs. These drugs destroy your central nervous system. They destroy your peripheral nervous system. They rot your brain. They found that in the autopsies with state patients who've been on these drugs for years. They do autopsies, the brain was shrunk like walnuts. And of course, when they published that research, I'm sure they tried to block it. When they published it, the psychiatric mafia and big pharma went, no, it's the schizophrenia that did that. It's not our drugs. So they started feeding these antipsychotics to monkeys, rats, and mice, and they saw the same result. These drugs cause physiological damage to the brain with long-term usage, and they're giving them to over 85,000 kids right now in the U.S. Over 389,000 kids are on anti-anxiety drugs, which are addictive. You know, this is the psychiatric mafia for you. Okay?
And then how do you do that, Jerry? You create all of these mental health problems. You don't have the science to back it up. And then whenever your kid is unruly, he's doing things that he shouldn't be doing, they put him on these antidepressants, they put him on these amphetamines like Adderall and Ritalin,
Yep.
like you were just mentioning. Then there's no other way around it than other than it being an agenda to basically medicate the entire
Yeah.
population.
Yep. Yep. And you can look at their profits. You know, global antipsychotic sales are, in 2021, we're at 14.54 billion, not million, $1 billion for these drugs that destroy your brain, that don't cure anything. They've made 14.54 billion on them. And by 2022, they expected that to surpass 15.5 billion. So antidepressant drugs that by 2023 they had 15.98 billion, not million, and these drugs cure nothing. They just tamp down symptoms. And if you turn on your TV, you're going to get smeared with all these drug ads, right? Oh, this drug, but yeah, for this drug, this drug. So, um, and then you look at the overall thing. Um, you know, close to 50,000 Americans are killing themselves every year. That's as many as died in Vietnam. 50,000 year after year after year after year, and it's increasing. And there's more.
Not only that, the overdose rate too. I'm pretty sure more people overdose per year than the people that died in Vietnam, the Iraq War, the Korean War, all combined.
Yeah, I
It's
wouldn't be
unbelievable.
surprised. So this is happening year after year after year after year, and it's getting worse. It's not getting better. So there's more psychiatrists, there's more psychologists, there's more psychiatric drugs on the planet than there's ever been before in human history, and the insanity rate is increasing. Between 1999 and 2019, suicide rate increased 33%. Now, you look at the suicide rate of schizophrenics, it's 3 to 5% above that of the general population. The suicide rate of psychiatrists is almost exactly the same. They're killing themselves at a rate virtually the same as schizophrenics. These are the people that are running the Western mental health system. Look at their track record. It's despicable. Nobody's getting better. They're getting rich, and nobody's getting better. People are getting worse, and they're getting worse year after year after year. And then you talk to any schizophrenic, hey, did you talk to your psychiatrist? Oh no, he doesn't talk to me. Just ask me how the medicines are doing, and am I still hearing voices? And if I tell him I'm still hearing voices, he increases the meds or he changes the meds. He doesn't talk to me about how I feel. And we'll bring Judy on in just a minute here. And I wanted to bring Judy on because she's been there. I mean, she has been in the depths of hell with these voices for over 4 years. They almost tried to get her to kill herself several times. You know, they brought her to the pits of hell, and most schizophrenics are not brave enough to talk about it because there's a stigma to it. You know, yeah, they and the voices themselves. If the person hearing voices starts talking about them, the voices attack them. They don't want them talking about the voices, right? And the psychotherapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists, they don't ask the patients about their voices. What are they? What are they saying? How do they operate? What do they do? What do they say? It- This is the major symptom of paranoid schizophrenia, which is the most prevalent type of schizophrenia on the planet. And these guys are not the least interested in the major symptom or investigating what it is. They have just blown it off, saying it's a hallucination. Take our word for it because we say so, with no research to back it, nothing to back it except hollow words. You know, I've investigated these things. They run fixed patterns. They've attacked me. I've spoken to them. I've spoken to them through schizophrenics. They've threatened me. I've had conversations with them. They're real. These things are entities, and they're parasitic entities because they suck your energy. So a schizophrenic, after being attacked, they will feel that they don't have any energy left whatsoever. But most of them don't notice it because they feel so bad overall anyway. But then when you start asking about it, how much energy do you feel you have before the voices come? How much after they come? They'll tell you. Well, now to think about it, I I don't have any energy after the voices attack. That's another consistent pattern. These things are parasites. They are feeding off the person's emotional energy. They have to turn it negative first, and then they can feed off it because they're very low vibratory entities. They can't stand, positive energy like Christ or God or anything like that. They want no part of that. You know? So
Someone's mentioning in the chat like marijuana and weed and indica and strains. How do you feel like that people can get into that same psychosis with marijuana and with
yeah,
weed? Because I've known some people that will smoke some weed and they will instantly get like paranoia. They'll go into basically a weed psychosis.
yeah, I think there's several facets to that. Is one, people who are unstable, psychologically unstable, kind of paranoid and on the edge anyway, they shouldn't be using that. That could push them over. Okay. The other thing is you never know what that marijuana is mixed with when you buy it off the street. It could be mixed with anything. You know? And the other thing I've heard is that the voices don't like marijuana because it calms the person down. You know, they don't want the person calmed down. They want them paranoid. They want them agitated. They want them feeling guilty. They want uh, uh, anxiety. That's what they feed off of, the negative emotions. Mm. So I've had several schizophrenics tell me, "Oh yeah, I use it because it calms me down," but the voices don't like it. They don't want me smoking it.
So in some people it helps, and other people it doesn't. So it's
It
like a
does.
case by case basis.
But marijuana could also be a, what do you call it, a kickoff to other drugs also. So you got to watch that. I know several people that started with marijuana and then moved up the line, to other drugs.
But they'll say that that's not factual, Jerry. They'll say that marijuana doesn't cause people to do other drugs. That's what they'll say.
Well, they can say that all they want. I've seen many that moved up the line with it. They start out with marijuana and they go, well, if marijuana is good, then meth must be better or fentanyl must be better. Or, they don't just stop there. Matter of fact, I asked one prisoner who was given Ritalin as a kid. I said, you were feeling good on the Ritalin. You were able to concentrate. Everything was fine. Why did you keep moving up and taking more and more, buying it off the street? And he said, well, I don't know. It felt good. And now he's in prison, you know. So they just kept increasing it. It's like, okay, if this little bit makes me feel good, what will more make me feel? Right? So I don't want to run on too much longer. I want
Yeah.
to get Judy on
Yeah.
here. Judy's been there. I mean, she's been to the depths of schizophrenia, psychosis, um, and I'll bring her on, and we'll just let her talk, and we can jump in from time to time with questions or comments, whatever you want. But I wanted her to talk to you because she has been there. I mean, she's been there. She's fought with the voices. She won uh, by turning to Christ, which a lot of people have. I mean, because they can't stand Christ, they can't stand God, they can't stand Jesus. So that tells you something.
Yes, and we're going to bring Judy on now, having personally endured the torment of schizophrenia for 4 years and experience that blurred the lines between psychological struggle and spiritual warfare. Judy Gregerson, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Ryder. I appreciate that.
Yes, thanks for coming on. How did you and Jerry meet?
Well, it was interesting. My youngest daughter found Jerry online. She found one of his podcasts that he was on, and she texted me and said, "This is your wheelhouse. You need to meet this guy." I'm like, "Well, okay. I don't know that I'll be able to get in contact with him," but I emailed him and said, "I can tell you a story. I've been there." And so we emailed a little bit, and then we talked on the phone once or twice, and then he asked me to go on podcasts with him. to go around and tell my story. And up to that point, I probably would not have told anyone. For years, I never told anybody about what I went through, because what Jerry was talking about, the stigma is so bad. People, when they hear that you are or you were schizophrenic, people have their own opinions about it, and you do get treated differently. I have friends from way back who knew me when, who won't have anything to do with me now because I was so crazy, and they don't believe you can get better. And so you always get treated like you're a little bit nuts. So I decided I'd just go full bore. I did have a book published in 1980 by Doubleday about this story, but I was younger then. I didn't fully understand what had happened, how I'd gotten out of it. Over the years, I've come to understand more, and I've come to understand spiritual warfare more. So now it's all very, very clear. But when I first pulled out of it, it was kind of a mush to understand what had happened. And I still fought spiritual battles for a long time. So Jerry takes me around with him on podcasts, and I tell the story, and hopefully somebody will hear and it'll make a difference in their life.
Absolutely. So take us back to the very beginning and how this started for you, Judy.
Yeah, well, there's three aspects to this. There's the journey to schizophrenia, there's the journey through schizophrenia, and then there's the journey out. And for me, the journey to, I actually believe that I was picked out by these entities when I was young. I grew up in a family with two alcoholics. I lived in tremendous amount of emotional abuse, verbal abuse, spiritual abuse, and watched my mother, who was my best friend, who I loved and adored, watched her literally disintegrate over a period of 5 years, from the time I was 8 till I was about 13. And that so completely traumatized me. And she left when I was 13. She didn't come back. And I was left with a brother and a sister and a father who was totally neglectful. He was very into his own life. By the time I was 13, I was binge drinking, going off, 200 miles away with my boyfriend for the weekend. At 14, I was going out with married men. I was promiscuous. All that trauma and all that abuse had taught me basically that I was nothing. And I think those entities groom you. You go through those things and they put ideas in your mind. You're nothing, you're nobody, you'll never be any good. Your life will never amount to anything. And you begin to believe that. So by the time I was about 14, I had a chip on my shoulder. I was angry. I was resentful. I was bitter. I was hurt. I was just so hurt. I was so damaged. I tried to commit suicide when I was 12. I tried again when I was 16. First, I took a bottle of pills that I slit my wrist when I was 16. And then things kind of calmed down a little bit. I went to live with a different family member, decided to go up to college, and I went off to college. But when I went, I thought I was going, and this was back in the 70s, so I thought I was going to this life. At that time, it was all free love and, free sex, and everything was wonderful. And off I went to college. But when I got there, I realized I didn't have the emotional coping skills that a lot of kids had. And so everything for me triggered trauma. I was constantly being triggered. And whenever I got triggered, I would try to kill myself, or I would slit my wrists, or I would do something. Every rejection was a major blowout in my life. And I got involved my freshman year with some people that were into LSD, and I became an acid head. I did tons and tons and tons of acid until I had a bad acid trip that just scared me, because on one acid trip, my brain literally, I could hear it snap. And I thought I had flipped. I thought I had flipped out. I thought, this isn't good. I've flipped. So I stopped doing acid, and I was still smoking pot. And so I finished up my freshman year, went home during the summer. And then during the summer, I started having these episodes where I would begin to I'd be walking. I was a waitress. I'd be walking, carrying a tray, and suddenly I would just black out. The room would go totally quiet. I wouldn't know where I was. I didn't know who I was. And I would just stand there. And I don't know if it lasted a second, 2 seconds, or 10 seconds, or a minute. I don't know. But it scared the daylights out of me. And it convinced me more that I had snapped. And I was on a road to psychologically disintegrating between all the negatives inside me, between all the being retriggered, all that trauma being retriggered every time something happened that wasn't pleasant. You know, if I was going out with some guy and he rejected me, it triggered all that trauma again. And I would become more and more depressed and more anxious and more and more into self-loathing. So I went back to college my sophomore year, and there was a guy that I had known my freshman year, and I liked him a lot. And I think I overwhelmed him because I was so psychologically and emotionally needy that I needed to get so close to people, like almost, I was like a Klingon. I was like a stage 4, my daughter would call it, a stage 4 Klingon, because I felt if I could hold on, I could hold on, you know, because I had nothing in myself to hold on to. And this guy, it overwhelmed him. He up and quit college. He left. And that so devastated me that I decided that I didn't need to live anymore. And I took a bottle of Valium and lay down on my dorm bed to die. And I was just laying there. And then I heard a voice, and it said, pick up the phone and call somebody, because if you die, you're going to hell, and that's not my plan for you. I'm like, what? What is that? And I thought, I really have snapped. So I did. I picked up the phone and called someone. And from there, I don't remember anything until I woke up in the hospital with pulling tubes out of my throat and kicking and screaming and trying to hit nurses. And that threw me into the mental health system that was in New York. So in New York, if you try to commit suicide, then you are sent into the system. So and around that time, and it was about a month of time that happened. Another thing happened was I met a woman on campus who preached the gospel to me, who it just really ticked me off. She came over and started preaching the gospel. And the way she opened it up was, she said, do you know that God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life? Well, that just pissed me off, because my life was in shreds. And she's all smiley and nice and telling me the good news. And I'm thinking, there isn't any good news. But she preached the gospel to me, and I got up finally and I just ran, you know, because I couldn't bear to hear it. It was horrible to hear it.
And that's common. That's common for a lot of schizophrenics. They don't want to hear anything about the gospel or Jesus or anything like that. They'll run.
Yeah.
Well, it's also kind of common for me as well, because I don't like religion or any kind of belief system ever being shoved down my throat. I don't ever like it. I don't want it. And I will immediately walk away from somebody that's trying to shove religion and Jesus down my throat. And I have no problem with people that God and religion and Christianity has helped them and made them a better person. I mean, I just told the story of me basically rebuking these entities by the name of Jesus Christ, right? But when people are preaching to me, or using God and all that, I just don't have anything to do with them.
Yeah, just trying to force it on you.
Yeah, and I don't want anything to do with that.
And you especially don't do it with schizophrenics, because you'll lose them right away. They'll be gone faster than greased lightning.
Well, and I felt, Ryder, I felt the same way you did. It's like, who are you to come tell me this? Who are you to come tell me about this good life I'm going to have, and about this God that loves me when my life it's in the tank? And so I ran from her. I did not want to hear it. And I went back to my dorm room and was thinking about what she told me. And I turned on, I used to love Santana, and I turned on the song Evil Ways. And it started playing, you got to change your evil ways, baby. And it hit me. I had to make a change. And I believed, my belief flipped, and I believed Jesus was real. He was alive. He loved me. I mean, the thoughts just came to me, and I believed it. And I thought, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe this is my out. Maybe this is the way I have to go. So I did call her up. I accepted Christ, became a Christian, and nothing changed. And so at that time, I was smoking a lot of pot, and you talked earlier about marijuana. I think marijuana is an open door toward schizophrenia. There's some statistics out that are saying that there are a tremendous amount of young men who smoke pot and then become schizophrenic, and they don't know what that connection is. And I think it's a spiritual. You open that door. So I was smoking pot one day, lying in my dorm room, listening to, I don't know, Van Morrison or somebody. And I began to hallucinate. And I got this picture in my mind of this big wooden door, this great big wooden door. And it was kind of sort of calling to me. And I thought, well, I was so stoned. I thought, well, maybe it's a portal. And I'd done enough acid. I'd walk through portals while I was on acid. My girlfriend and I used to go through portals regularly. So I thought, well, it's a portal. So there's something fun on the other side. So in my mind, I opened that door and I walked in, and then I shut the door behind me. And the space that I went into was kind of a gray, white space. It was nothing there. It was an emptiness. It was a void. And as soon as I shut the door, the voices started. And they began to mock me. And there were 4 of them. And they were located literally two in front of me and 2 behind me. And they began to mock me. And they would say, oh, look at her. She's so crazy. And then the other would say, oh, she's not crazy. She's just nuts. And the other would say, oh, don't pick on her. She's such a waste of a human being. And they would go on. And the voices went on and on and on. But not only did
what did you think they were?
I didn't know. I was so high. I thought, oh, this is just part like of a hallucination or something. But the problem was when I came down, Ryder, my mind was in a different dimension. I don't know how to explain that, but it was in another world. So my body was in this world. My mind was somewhere else. My mind was captured by these voices and by their presence. And they did have a presence. And there was an oppression that came with them. And there was nothing pleasant about it. And in that world, in that dimension, there was no peace. There was no love. There was nothing good. Nothing. It was
just a literal, negativity.
Yeah, negativity. It was a literal hell. And they talked to me constantly. They would talk so loud sometimes. Like if I went to the student union, I couldn't hear the people around me because they were so loud. They would just scream at me and torment me. So I ended up in the midst of all this, ended up in the mental health system with a psychiatrist, got my diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, got my drugs, which was all they had. The diagnosis was, I tell Jerry this, despair and drugs. They give you despair. There's no hope. There's no change. You're never coming out. And they give you the drugs. So I began.
Now, what did these, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. What did these voices sound like? Were these voices, did they sound like your own voice, or were they different? Or did they feel like that they were external to you? Did they feel like that they were in your head? And what did they sound like?
There were 3 that sounded like males and 1 that sounded like a woman. They didn't at first sound like me. I could differentiate male from female. They sounded like they were echoing in my head, but I could feel them around me. And they were positioned, like I said, 2 in front, 2 behind. That's how I felt them. That's how I experienced them. But as I got on the drugs, and the drugs kind of sunk in and got hold of me, they morphed more into my thoughts. So instead of them screaming at me, it was like me screaming at me, saying, you're worthless. Nobody wants you. Nobody loves you. You need to die. There's no reason for you to live. There's nothing good. You're never coming out of this. You're never going to be free. And it was like being thrown into a hole. It was about 250 feet deep, and there was nobody at the top, and there was no way to get out. I was just in this hell. So I tried to live in the world. So you try to live in the real world, but your mind is in this other dimension. So in the real world, you go through the motions. You say what you think you're supposed to say. I didn't tell my friends that I heard voices because I thought they would think I was crazy, and I knew I was crazy. So I didn't tell them that. I just told them I wasn't here anymore. And they'd say to me, what do you mean you're not here anymore? I say, I'm not here anymore. I'm not here physically. I'm somewhere else. And they didn't understand that. I understood it because I lived in 2 worlds, and they were 2 very, very different worlds. But I never felt peace. It was 24/7 anxiety, depression, fear, paranoia. And I was convinced somebody was coming to take me away. And these voices convinced me that I had done something that was so bad that I needed to be punished.
Now,
And
once they
so,
moved in your head, Judy, did you think that was you, or did you still know it was them? Because what happened to you is opposite of what usually happens. Usually they start in the head, and as they get stronger, then they'll move out.
that's
Instead, yours was reversed. But did you see? That's what's so devastating about them, because they sound just like your thoughts, right? There weren't any
mhm.
difference than your thoughts. Only they're telling you all this rotten stuff that it doesn't match with your intention for yourself. You know.
I thought, Jerry, that from doing all the drugs and looking back over what had happened after all the acid I did and realizing that I was breaking down, I was breaking down emotionally, I thought that I had shattered my mind. And these voices were parts of those shattered pieces
Okay.
that were trying to put me back together. And I spent hours obsessing on how was I going to put these shattered pieces back together so there was just one me,
Yeah, I've
not
had
these parts of me.
several prisoners I worked with. They asked the voices, "Who are you? What are you?" And they would respond. The voices would say, "We are you." So they
Mhm.
want you to think that those are your own thoughts. You know, that you are the one who's crazy, and that there's not anything external happening to you.
Yeah.
It's your brain is broken, your mind is broken, and that those thoughts are yours. And unfortunately, from the time we're born, we believe that every thought that comes into our minds belongs to us. That's far from true.
Mhm.
Manuel Swedenborg says none of your thoughts are yours. They either come in from heaven or they come in from hell. You are the chooser. You pick which ones you're going to follow.
Well, in these voices, and then as they became more my own voices, and I think it's because the drugs, like you said, it tamps down the intensity, or I won't say the intensity, it tamps down the volume. The intensity is still the same, and it got me into this mindset where everything was negative. Life was negative. I was negative. College was negative. None of my friends loved me enough. Nothing was good
And Judy, what was
because
your experience with the psychiatrist who gave you those drugs? Did they give you any personal attention? Did they talk to you or try to find out what was going on with you, or try to find out how you were feeling, or what you were doing? I mean, did they spend any time with you at all?
I saw the psychiatrist every 2 weeks for half an hour. We chat a little bit. How you doing? I tell him, about the same. And he would check on my drugs, see if they needed to go up or to go down. And that was it. There was no counseling. There was no therapy. There was no nothing. He told me that I had a chemical imbalance. My brain was broken and it was forever. It was absolutely forever.
And how'd you feel about that message?
Well, it's devastating
Yeah, it is.
because
And it's not
because
true.
well, because you believe your life is over. So the conflict then becomes, why am I alive? If there's no hope, if there's no future, what is the point? Is the point to spend the rest of my life fighting this? And like you were saying, Jerry, when they get bad, when the voices get bad, you get so exhausted. The battle is so draining. And I learned that, or I came to believe that there were different levels in this hell that I was in. I guess, a top level, but I could see I could be pushed lower. I could be
Yeah.
pushed to the point where I'd be totally insane, or I could be pushed to the point where I'd be catatonic, or I could be pushed to whatever point they wanted to push me to. It was like always like standing over a cliff, the edge of a cliff, and knowing anytime you could be pushed over. So when those voices and that presence and that oppression is on you, so heavy, you spend all your energy trying to maintain what little is left of you, because your identity is gone. You are nothing. Your life is gone. Your relationships are gone. I mean, I had relationships with people, but I couldn't connect with anybody on
I
an
remember
emotional level.
Sherry Sweeney, my co-author, saying that she ran into that same kind of phenomena where she felt like she was on the fence, and
Mhm.
that if she went over, that it would be all over, and the voices were telling her, just let go, just, let go, fall over the fence. They'll take care of you. You won't have to worry about anything. They'll feed you. You'll be in a mental hospital. You won't have to worry about anything. Just let go and fall over.
Mm-hmm.
So she talked about the same kind of battle.
Well, yeah, you're always looking, or on that fence, or you're always looking over that cliff, and you don't know what day you're going to go to the next level and what that next level is going to be. And they're always pushing you. And when it becomes so much your own thoughts, you begin a battle in your head with yourself. You think it's the voices, but the battle begins, and you begin to fight with what's left of you. And they beat you down because I had 4 of them. So what chance did I have to win a fight?
So it's like you're battling against yourself, and instead of having an enemy that you can see that, well, these are entities, these are demons, these are not me, but when you're battling against yourself, I mean, that's devastating. That's like almost a no-win situation.
You do it 24 hours a day. So like I would wake up in the morning and the battle would start. I would think, oh, what a piece of crap I am. Oh, I can't get through the day. I've got nothing. I'm worth nothing. Nobody wants me. Why do I bother to leave my dorm room? And it would start like that. And you'd have to fight that even just to get dressed. What is the reason to get, there's no reason to get dressed. Go back in your bed, crawl into a ball, and stay there. Don't ever come out. Don't eat. Die. And the message was basically die. And I knew that at some point I was going to die. Either somehow they would arrange killing me or I would arrange killing me. But I knew that my end was going to be death. But it was a matter of how long could I fight? How long could I hold out for? So during the day, I'd get up, I'd try to go to classes, I'd sit, I couldn't read books because I couldn't concentrate. You're in a mental freeze. If you've ever been at a point in your life where you're really oppressed mentally, you get in that mental freeze and you're stuck, you're paralyzed. Mentally, you're paralyzed emotionally, and you're also a lot of times paralyzed physically. So that moving is very, very hard. Thinking is impossible. You can't think for yourself. All you can do is fight. So your life becomes this constant fight, and it's going on in your head, but you're trying to live in the real world and talk to people. And so, people are watching you go through this, flipping from one world to the other. And people they kind of drift away. I had friends, but they kind of emotionally they didn't want to get too close because they never knew what I was going to do or say. I mean, I at one point painted black bars on my window in my dorm and on my door. And my roommate said, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "Because I'm in prison. And I need to see my prison. I need to see it. It's got to be visible." And she's like, "Okay." I mean, I would do things like that. And she'd be like, "Okay." And she'd leave the room and be gone for as long as she could be gone. So you lose your connection with everything and everybody. And you're battling yourself 24 hours a day. And twilight was the worst. Jerry, you mentioned about the darkness. That when twilight comes, I don't know what it is, but it's something about the encroaching darkness of night because you're living in darkness. So to add another layer of darkness to that,
that's another pattern. It's another one of the patterns.
I would sit and drink bottles of wine at night just to be able to get through twilight. That was the only way I could get through it. It was so unbearable to see the darkness coming. So, and then after a while, after you've been on the drugs a while, then you go into the stage of going through schizophrenia, and you go through, and I'm working on another book right now about this. You go through what I would call kind of the doldrums, where you are drugged out, you're in the battle, you're exhausted, you're going nowhere, and you're waiting for something to happen, a crisis or an accident or something, because you don't know what's going to happen. You're no longer engineering your own life. You're no longer in charge of where you're going or what you're doing because you're in a constant state of reaction. It's like being on a 24-hour hypervigilance journey every day. If you've ever been in a panic attack where you're so hypervigilant, it's like that 24 hours a day. And I was in that state for 4 years. And to this day, I have problems with my nervous system because I think it was so overcharged and so overworn for so long that it broke parts of my nervous system. I wake up in the middle of the night and my nerves are trembling, and it also could be from the drugs that I took. It could be a part of that. I don't know. Nobody's ever been able to explain it to me why I get this trembling, especially in my chest. And so getting through that numbed out part, you're waiting for something to happen. And then I reached a point where I came to the end of the road. I flunked out of college. My father called me home. I went home. He told me, stop this game you're playing. I don't like it. And you go back to school. You go wherever you want to go. Don't come home until you figure this out, because I don't want anything to do with this. So he basically cut me off. So I went back up to college. I went and lived in the sorority house. I joined a sorority. I'd done that because I thought that would fix me. That didn't fix me. It just complicated my life all the more because I had all these people to deal with. And I went up and lived in the sorority house, and I reached the end. I was on welfare. I couldn't work. I couldn't do anything basically but sit in a chair. I didn't eat half the time because it was too complicated to make a meal. I couldn't cope with making a meal. I lived, I think, that summer on white rice. I'd make a pot of rice, and that's what I lived with because I couldn't deal with cooking. And I decided that summer, one day I decided, well, this is it. It's over. I'm done. So I one night waited for everybody to be quiet in the sorority house. I went outside. I had a little Volkswagen Bug, and I cut a hose outside, and I put it in my car, and put it in the exhaust, and put it in the car, and got on, and turned the car on, and rolled the window up as tight as I could, and waited to die. And I had a very good friend who lived in the sorority house that summer, and she sensed something was wrong when I left. And she came running out and pulled me out of the car and saved me. And it was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. But I'd heard about, it was a secretarial course in Syracuse. I was in Oswego, New York. There was a secretarial course in Syracuse you could take for 4 months. I thought, well, if I could get some skills, I could work. But I needed something very rote, something I didn't have to think about because I couldn't think. My cognitive functions were just so messed up. And so I went to my psychiatrist and I told him I tried to kill myself. And I said, if you don't help me, I'm going to kill myself because there's nothing left for me. My life is over. And he said, well, what do you want? And I told him I wanted to go to this secretarial school. It was like 4 months or 3 months. It was really quick. And he said, okay. And he got me on a vocational program, rehab program, to get the money to pay for it. And I had that Christian friend of mine. She lived in Syracuse, and she knew some students at Syracuse University who were renting a house, and they had a room, and they were willing to take me in as a roommate. And so off I went to Syracuse and got enrolled in that little school. And it was the same scenario. I could barely make it to class. I was supposed to learn shorthand. I couldn't make any sense out of shorthand. It was garbled gook to me. So I couldn't do that. I was living with 5 or 6 women. I couldn't have a relationship with them because I was so much in this other world. And by that time I was severely depressed because I really felt my life had come to an end. And I didn't know quite now how it was going to end. I sort of had hope with the secretarial school, but at the same time I sort of didn't. But it was like, I've got to do something. I got to press on. So I decided, and my roommates didn't understand. I didn't tell them my diagnosis. I just told them I had emotional problems. And I think I made their life a misery, to be honest with you, in a lot of ways, because I wouldn't participate. I wouldn't be part. I was just hostile to everybody at that point.
This whole time you're hearing voices and you're still thinking they're you.
Yeah, I'm still hearing all the negative stuff. You are no good. You shouldn't live. You ruined yourself. Look at all the horrible things you did. They're coming to get you. And they're coming to get you thing was so intense that if the phone rang, I would jump. And I think this is it. This is the phone call. I didn't know what they were coming to me for, but I knew, I was convinced I needed to be punished. I did some really crazy stuff when I was a teenager. I mean, I did all kinds of crazy stuff when I was a teenager. Things that they'd lock kids up now, they put them in juvie for. We thought it was fun. So I thought,
So they were like placating upon your trauma from before, bringing up old past trauma that you had been through before. Did the voices ever predict anything that happened to you, like regardless if it was bad or not? Because I believe that it was Patrick Dirk that was on the show last time. Me and Patrick and Jerry, we did a show together, and he was talking about how, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, but I think that it was him that said that the voices basically set up a drug deal for him to get more drugs.
Well, I've heard prisoners have told me that over and over again, especially with meth, that they would tell the patient where to be and when to be there, and then some stranger would show up with drugs. And then I heard another story was similar, where the voices told one guy to go to this one spot, and another guy walked up and just asked him, "Hey, what do you want?" So it's almost like they can possess two people and bring them together to get them to use meth. Which and I haven't heard it with any other drug than meth. It seems like they're pushing people to use meth.
But there was also a case that I had heard about where a lady was hearing the voices, and then she was told to take off all of her clothes and then run through traffic or something like that, and that she was going to be protected.
I talked to an exorcist the other day. He said that a lot of the people he works with who are hearing voices, the voices tell them to get naked, to take off all their clothes. That's a common thing that they do.
Well, and Ryder, one thing they told me, I forgot to tell you this, when I was in college, I was up in a lounge with my friend Jim and his girlfriend Franny, and Jim was the one who got me into LSD. And the voices told me to pick up a big lamp and kill him. I said, he's the one that ruined your life. He ruined your life. He's the one that did it to you. He doesn't deserve to live. And the lamp had a big, because it was college stuff, so it was heavy, big metal base. They said, pick it up, crush his skull until his brains smear out. And I was actually tempted to do that, but I had enough enough sense of right and wrong, I guess, to be able to go to shake it off, to say no, and walk out of the room. But it was very compelling.
Was this before you the voices started to tell you to like kill yourself? Because this is something that I've always heard with like demonic possession, right? Is that the entity tries to get you to commit murder or like do crimes or like kill somebody, and if they can't get you to do that, then it turns on you. Then they turn on you and try and get you to kill yourself. Did this happen before it started saying, kill yourself, you're worthless, you're all of that, or what was the timeline there?
Well, the suicide attempts progressed through my life as my identity and my sense of self were ruined by the trauma, and then my response to the trauma, which wasn't good. And when I first went to the psychiatrist, the first thing he asked me are you homicidal or are you suicidal? That was his first question. Which are you? He wanted to know how much they had to watch me, because I had to go before a panel of psychiatrists to decide whether I got to go to stay where I was or whether they needed to institutionalize me. And that was one of the big questions. The voices didn't tell me to kill someone, or I didn't think about that until after the voices were in full gear. Probably that first year, they told me to do that. I mean, they told me things like jump out the 10th story window, you'll be fine. Nothing will happen to you. You'll just bounce. It'll be fine. I mean, they tell me that, if I ate something, that my dorm was going to blow up. They told me if I went to the dining hall and ate dinner, that a 747 was going to come and fly through the window. I mean, that's how they'd keep me from going to eat. I mean, that's part of how they controlled me, using fear and predicting terrible things would happen, or good things would happen if they wanted me to do something bad. So, they manipulated and managed me to such a degree as they were able.
I think they want to get people in prison. because it takes a lot of energy for them to keep tormenting you like that. I mean, they have a limited amount of energy also. But once you get thrown in prison, that's a totally paranoid, nasty, dark environment. And there's so much violence and fear going on there that they don't have to work there at all. They don't, it's like it belongs to them, you know. And again, my co-author one time, she was sending they were doing Reiki and sending Reiki energy, positive energy into one of the prisons. She said that one night when she was doing that, this big black puff of smoke showed up right in front of her and said, "These people are mine. You stay away." You know, so that's the second time I've heard something like that too. So I think they want to throw people in prison. It's like a hell on earth. And as soon as you walk through the doors, you can feel it. I mean, you can feel it. The atmosphere is very different.
It's a cesspool.
Well, I think too they want to push everybody as far as they can push them. I mean, they tested me. Will you kill somebody? Basically, no, I wouldn't do that. But I would try to commit suicide. You know, so they test to see what your limits were, and then keep pushing you a little further where you're weak. You know, they literally groom you, you know, to some degree, but you really think it's you. And by the time I was in the middle of this, but by the time I was, say, 2.5 years in, everything about me was negative. Everything about everybody. I hated everybody. Hated my family. Hated myself. Hated my roommates. I hated everybody. Everything was bad. There was nothing good. They pull you into that, and that negativity begins to shatter you. I mean, you shatter to further degrees. And like when I was in Syracuse, I decided, I'd go commit myself. I thought maybe that'll help. Maybe somebody can help me. So I went to the local inpatient place and knocked on the door and got to talk to a psychiatrist. And he told me I couldn't commit myself there for some reason. I don't know why. I don't remember why. And he said he couldn't. I said, well, can't you help me? He said, no, I really can't because you're not in here. And he talked to me this morning. He said, well, I'll tell you what, you come by a couple of times a week and I'll talk to you. And I started doing that. And then he flipped me over to this young guy who just got out of college. And I began to see him. And at the same time, I flunked out of secretarial school, but they set me up in a job at the Syracuse Post-Standard on the copy desk, and I was typing computer code, which was a good thing for me because it was easy to learn. The code was very basic then. It was easy to learn, and it was rote. So I was doing a rote thing. So I didn't really have to think. It was just rote. And so I began to see this counselor, and this counselor didn't, I don't know what he thought. He decided my problem was that I was filled with hatred and bitterness and anger. And he told me, you know, if I would deal with that stuff, I would get better. And I didn't know. I didn't know really what that meant. I mean, it didn't make any sense to me because there I got, you know, the voices in my head, my own thoughts, and he's talking about bitterness. It didn't compute. And then one day he said to me, well, if you don't want to deal with your problems, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. So he said, I'm going to walk out of the room and you decide. And he walked out of the room and I thought, well, I got nothing to lose. I might as well try this. So we started meeting, you know, 3 times a week. And he started dealing with my trauma. He started dealing with what had happened to me as a kid. I mean, I was sexually molested when I was 3 years old. I was sexually molested 2 times as a teenager, once with my father's blessing. My father sent me up in a car with one of his friends one night when he was drunk. And, you know, the loss of my mother. So we started going back to that trauma and opening up those wounds. And I spent a couple of months, 4 or 5, maybe 6 months, just crying, getting all this stuff out. And as I cried, and I began to learn to forgive. Because this guy would say to me, your parents were just people. They were messed up people. They weren't trying to destroy you. Because I was convinced that my father and my mother purposely destroyed me. I mean, that's what I believed by then. It was all their fault. Everything was everybody else's fault. And
did the sexual abuse come from your father?
No.
Okay. You don't have to tell me who, but I was just curious because that's one of the things that a lot of people go through that end up in these MK Ultra style CIA mind control programs, is that they are abused by a family member or a family member friend, and then they get later on they get more abuse. It's like a priming thing for people. They search out these people that have been abused whenever they were younger, so because they're more easily mind fractured and their consciousness split, so that they could carry out the government's plans and the things that they want to use them for.
Yeah, there's some question about all of what happened. I remember, Ryder, being about 7 years old and my mother telling me that there was some man that wanted to buy me. Now, why a mother would tell her 7-year-old that there was a man who wanted to buy me and my sister. My sister was 2 years older. And I remember that. It didn't really scare me, but my mother had been an orphan. Her mother was killed in a car accident when she was 9. Her dad was permanently disabled and blinded. He was in a state hospital. So she was an orphan. She'd been passed around the family. So she had some crazy ideas, superstitions. I don't know where she got them. And I never understood what that was about somebody wanting to buy me. And the funny thing about being sexually molested at 3 was I didn't know that I had been until I was living in New York City later in life. And I was sitting one night just praying, and in my mind up bubbled this picture of me 3 years old in the field across from the street that I lived in, and this man coming to me and sexually molesting me. And I thought, am I making this up? So I called my mother and I said, what the heck happened to me when I was 3? And she said, who told you? I said, nobody told me. I remembered. And I said to her, why didn't you do something? And she couldn't answer. She couldn't answer why she wouldn't talk about it. So I had repressed all that. I wondered all my life why I didn't like people touching me. People would come to hug me. I go to church and, church is like, hey, how you doing? Big hug. And I'm like, get away. Don't touch me. I never understood that until that day that I understood. So they had played off all that trauma. So as I worked with this counselor, he started getting down into that trauma and helping me take a look at it and deal with it and cry and express my horror at all the things that happened. And there were many other things that happened. When I was 17, I was involved with a guy who was in organized crime, and he had tried to strangle me one night when we were drunk. And I kind of stuck around with him after that. That's how crazy I was at that point, because I didn't understand at 17. I didn't understand danger. To me, it was excitement. Somebody tries to strangle you and I stayed with them. It's like, what kind of craziness is that? So I had been shaped and groomed so much as a young person to be drawn to that edge. It was a pull, always a pull to that edge. So as I was working with this counselor and we started getting this stuff out, Ryder, I started to almost feel human. And there's this load, this burden of resentment and bitterness and pain and trauma was lifting. I began to feel like me again. I began to feel like a person, and hope returned. But still there was the negative stuff going on. But I was getting better. They had less of an influence. They could come, but they couldn't stay all the time anymore, because it was a part of me that was getting healthy and a part of me that was regaining, I guess, my identity, and a part of me that was repairing, was becoming healthy. And I was still at that point on the drugs, and they still had me a little bit zoned out.
So it's still at this point you thought the voices were you.
Oh yeah, I was sure that they were me. I was sure that it was me, that I was negative, that I was messed up, and I just figured I was gonna have to live with messed up me. But there was this other part that was getting healthy. So now there was kind of a split. I was almost like two people. I was this really sick person, and I was this part that was getting healed by getting rid of this trauma. So I was going to this charismatic Methodist church, and one day I went to church, and there was this Black evangelist, Evelyn Carter from Philadelphia there, and she talked. I don't remember what she said. I have no idea what she said, but I was sitting there thinking, I think she could help me. There's something she said that made me think she could help me. So I went home and I called one of the elders and I said, could I talk to her? Because she was staying with the elders. And I knew the elders pretty well. And they said, sure, come on over. So I went over. And so she said, how can I help you? What's going on? So I started telling her about the voices and this whole story. And she listened only for a couple of minutes. And then she just said, Judy, stop. She said, I'll tell you what you're dealing with. And I said, what? She said, you're dealing with demons. I'm like, demons? Because I was so used to this being, it was me. It was all me. And she said, you're dealing with demons. And she says, I'll tell you how to win this battle. And I'm like, okay. And she gave me a little book called the Jesus Pocket Promise Book, which is just a bunch of scriptures divided into different topics. And so she said, what's your biggest problem? Well, fear. I had constant fear and paranoia. That was big. That was all the time. Fear lived in me like it owned me. And she said, okay, so when this comes over you and you're overwhelmed, take your little book out and you go to the section on fear and you read the scriptures out loud about fear. And you say, Satan, I belong to Jesus. You don't have any right in my life. God's word says blah, 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 blah. So in Jesus' name, I command you to go because you can't touch me. And she handed me the book, and that was kind of the end of the conversation. And I walked away going, wow, okay. It's just so easy. It's like this magic bullet.
How did you react when she told you they were demons?
Well, I read the Bible enough to know that demons existed. I knew that demons in scripture made people crazy.
But you didn't know what they were or how they operated.
Yeah, I just knew that Jesus encountered, 16, 18, 20 people in the Bible, and he cast out demons. I knew he did that. I was a little bit horrified that demons had control over my life. I didn't know what part of my thinking was me or what could be them. I was hopeful that maybe there was some truth in this, but to be honest with you, I didn't really believe it. It was like, this is too easy. It's too simple. It isn't going to work. But I took the little booklet. So I went to work. I don't know if it was that day or soon after with my little book. I worked on the copy desk, and I was sitting there not soon after that, and the paranoia and the fear came over. And when it would come over, it would paralyze my mind. I'd just be like this in terror, in absolute terror. So I grabbed my little book and I ran to the ladies' room and locked myself in a booth, made sure there was nobody else in that room. And I started reading. I opened up to the fear part where it says, God's not giving you a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. And I read it a couple of times. And then I said, you don't own me. I belong to Jesus. You can't touch me. You've got to go. So get out of here now in Jesus' name. And like that, it left. It left. The presence left. The mind-numbing paralysis left. The presence, that overwhelming, oppressive presence left, and I was clear for the first time in 4 years. I was clear. The weirdest thing was that I was normal. I wasn't broken. Not like I'd felt that I'd been. And I think that when you're in that state of schizophrenia, they give you a picture of yourself. They show you who they want you to think you are. I thought I was irreparable. I thought I was unfixable. I thought there was nothing left of me. I thought my identity and my soul and my spirit and my emotions had been completely shattered. So when that presence or those presence left, and I realized I'm me, I felt like me again. It's like you wake up in the morning and on a good day and you're like, wow, it's a good day and I feel good and I'm glad to be me. There was never a day like that when I was under their poison.
At what point did you realize that they weren't you, that they were demons, they were some other force?
I realized it on that day when I told them to go and they went.
Then it was like, oh, this isn't me.
This isn't me.
Okay.
I also realized later, Jerry, that I had been put on a trajectory toward healing without realizing it by first dealing with the trauma, dealing with unforgiveness. Unforgiveness is food for these things, and I was loaded with it. And when I see people with unforgiveness in their life, there's always a darkness about them. I can see it. I can see it on them. Unforgiveness is it's like handing them candy to eat. They love it. And so as I look back, I realized, okay, I went through this healing of trauma. I went through forgiveness. I wasn't holding grudges against anybody. And I even forgave myself. And then I met her, and she gave me that element of dealing with the spiritual end of it, because there's the trauma end, there's the emotional end, and then there's the cognitive part, and then there's the demonic part. So you've got all these things working. There's more than just one thing to heal, you know. And so that day I was clear. Well, then the battle began, because then they began to test me. Did I really believe that I could make them go with the word of God? And so I went through a 3 or 4 month battle where I'd be all clear, and all of a sudden, boom, they were back. And I was back in that paralysis, and I was back in that hypervigilance and that ugly, ugly, ugly hell. And I would pull that book out again, and I would read, and I would tell them, in the name of Jesus Christ, you have to go. You have no power, no authority over me. I will not tolerate you. And boom, they would go like that. I mean, they would go instantly. And I'd be like, wow. And then I realized, okay, I found my answer. I can get my life back. And so I began to battle with real determination, because I decided I'm not giving up my life for them. I'm not giving it up. I'm not going to let them have me. And so I fought through that, and I was still then on the drugs. And the counselor said, well, he could see I was doing better. I never talked to him about the voices, because you just don't. You don't talk about that stuff. You don't want to set people off and get them thinking whatever they're going to think. But he told me it was time to get off the drugs. Well, then panic set in, because I thought, well, what if really this is all working because now the drugs are working? Maybe this is, I began to doubt, and I got very confused. But I thought, you know what? I've gone this far. I'll take the risk. I'll do it. And so I stopped the drugs. I said, what do I do? He said, just stop them. And I went through withdrawal, which was a nightmare, of shakes and sweating and severe fear and paranoia. It was a couple of days of that. I don't remember how long, but it was at least a couple of days. And I got off them. And then I woke up. It was Easter morning. And I woke up that morning and got out of bed, and I sat on the end of my bed, and I realized the drugs were out of my system. The withdrawal was over, and my head was clear. And I realized I was back. I was back. And that was the getting out. But then there is the getting over. And Ryder, you probably understand this. After 4 years of being beat into a hole like that, then you've got to change your thinking patterns. I had to rebuild my mind. I had to completely rewire my mind. And what I did to do it was I read scripture 2 to 3 to 4 hours a day, and tried to find everything positive in it that I could that was the opposite of what I believed. And I began to change my belief system. And I began to rewire my brain. And I did that over a period of years. I did that. I just kept working at it and working at it and working at it. And that after, I was through that, I got my mind renewed, and then it was over. It was over, and it was done, and I was free. And that was almost 50 years ago. 45.
Judy, do you have
Wow.
any doubt in your mind at all that these entities, these voices, were demons, were negative entities?
No, because I still, as a Christian, and I don't know, Ryder, how it is for you in your world, what you deal with, but there's always that battle in our thoughts.
Yes, they hit everybody.
Always that battle. They hit everybody, and so I still get hit with negative stuff, but it's not that overwhelming schizophrenic garbage. It's the same thing Ryder deals with, or you deal with, the negative stuff, and that's just the battle, I think, of our lives, because they're working on everybody. They're working on our culture right now. They're working on our government. They're working in education. They're working everywhere. So I still deal with that. But I knew, and I knew that it was demonic. I didn't fully understand it when I was 25. I couldn't have explained it to you the way I do today, because I didn't know enough about the spiritual realm. But I went on to have many spiritual experiences. My husband and I, our first house we bought was haunted. We had a black creature with wings, in our house. Our house filled with sulfur. We had all kinds of weird things happen. My daughter had 9 imaginary friends that turned out to be demons that we laid hands on her and prayed and commanded them to go. And the next day she woke up, didn't even remember she ever had them. They were completely taken out of her life. And I realize now they were taken out because if she remembered that she had them, she'd probably invite them back in because she didn't think they were bad. We knew. So God began to confirm this whole demonic realm to me and took me into these experiences where I could see the demonic, I could see that realm, and I learned how to deal with it. And I work with people now. I don't do deliverance. I'm not a big fan of deliverance per se, but I work with especially women now who have some form of darkness in their life, something that's taken over. They're not schizophrenic. I think schizophrenics are extremely hard to deal with because you can't convince them it's not them. Most people, I've met many people that are mentally ill, whether they're borderline personality or bipolar, very hard to convince them it's anything but them. The psychiatric mafia is very, very, very good at convincing people that they're irretrievably broken. And these people, by the time they've been in the system for a year or two, they believe it. They believe it hardly. So I thought, well, I'll help people come out. I'll help people come out of schizophrenia. I don't know, Jerry. How many have you seen come out?
Maybe 20 or so.
Yeah, very hard.
It's possible. They're difficult.
Yeah,
they're some of the most difficult patients that I work with.
And that's the thing about all this is that there's like, not only are you dealing with like the criticisms of your own internal monologue, like what we're talking about, but you're also dealing with other people's negative thoughts and their labels and them coming at you as well. And then there's also this thing, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but there's a disorder, I think that it's called, I think the proper term is folie à deux.
Oh yeah, that's
where
where 2 people go nuts at the same time with
that
the same delusion.
exactly, but one of them didn't have that delusion before. So it's almost like you share this delusion together. So if you were to lock up like a sane person into a psychiatric facility and they weren't insane, sort of like what happened with Patrick Dirk that we had on before, where he was sane going into the prison system, to the psychiatric facility around all of these insane people that have all these disorders. You only have a few options. You either keep your mental sanity, which requires a lot of fortitude, exactly like you have, Judy. You have to have that mental defense, that mental fortitude, or you slowly become insane yourself because you're around insane people 24/7.
I had one fella who told me his mother was schizophrenic, and he was fairly intelligent. He was doing well in school and stuff. He said he had to move away from her because he started hearing her voices also.
So it's something along the lines, it kind of goes back to that saying, you are what you eat, you are who you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with evil and bad intentioned people that are doing crime, then you have to have a built-in defense mechanism to not go along with the crowd. It's like the 100th monkey effect, right? What we all kind of grew up hearing from our parents, a lot of us was like, well, if your friend jumped off of a bridge, would you also jump off of the bridge? Mm-hmm. That's kind of like what it's like. And the people and the scenarios and the situations and the environment that you surround yourself with ends up shaping and molding you as a person.
Well, Ryder, one really good thing that came out of this for me was that I learned without a doubt who I was and my worth and my value. And I learned how easy, like you're saying, it is to absorb what's around you, and especially if you're an empath. And I learned to be able to block that. But I can read people. people walk into a room, I can tell you sometimes what their problem is. I can tell you what they're up to because I can feel it, the garbage on them. I can see the garbage on them. I recently went to a meeting with a bunch of people that I meet with once a week. And this guy came in, and he was a nice looking guy in his probably late 40s. And he was a nice pair of jeans. And he had one of those jackets that you wear if you're bicycling that has yellow stripes. And he looked like $1 million. And he walked in the room, and I looked at him, and I could see he had come in that room to take over, to gain power over this group and to gain authority and leadership. It was written all over him. I thought, oh, this is going to be fun to watch. And he sat 2 over from me, and the group met and talked. And first thing he did was tell an outrageous story about how he'd been raised from the dead. And I'm sitting there going, okay, this is going to be good. And then when the group started talking, he jumped in and he began to take over. And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting to see how the men in this group deal with somebody because he came in all power. It was oozing from him. So one of the good things of having been through this is I can see that on people now. It's easy to see it. And I learned to not absorb. So I'm able to be around people who are into whatever they're into, whatever darkness they're into, and I don't have to absorb it. It took me years, though, to learn that. It took me years.
That's a superpower. That's a superpower, Judy.
Yeah.
Like, not a lot of people are able to do that. They end up getting encompassed into their situation, right?
But I need that for the work that I do, and I think it's a gift because I deal with women with problems and women with trauma, and it'd be very easy to get caught up in that and be pulled into it and be pulled down by it. But I'm able to keep myself separate and maintain myself. And people tell me, it's interesting, people tell me when you walk in a room and people look at you, they know that you have figured out who you are, you know who you are, and you're not somebody to mess with. And I don't think I give off a vibe, but I learned how to possess myself and not allow anything in, because there's always something coming to intrude, a person, a spirit, a demon. Our society is pressing in on us now on so many levels. And I've learned to hold that. I guess it's a boundary, and people sense that about me, that I have this boundary, and they don't understand it. The things bounce off me, but that's, I guess, the benefit of having been a schizophrenic.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I've had to develop that too with what I did, working in the prison, working in psych hospitals, doing psych crisis. I had to develop that same thing. It's like a fortress that you look out of to see the insanity that's going on out there, and then figure out what you can do about it. But you can't let it get to you, because it will.
That's a really rare thing, though. Like, I'm willing to bet if people were to run an experiment, and this is just an example, I'm going to use drugs in this example, but you could substitute drugs for anything. Let's say that you lived in a house with nothing but drug users. You weren't a drug user. Doesn't matter what the drug is. It could be weed, it could be LSD, it could be mushrooms, whatever. And you lived in a house with nothing but drug users, but you were straight edge. You didn't use drugs. How long is it going to be for a weak person, a weak-minded person? And that's not meaning derogatory toward anyone. But it seems like at some point, if you live with these people for long enough, all of these drug addicts, that you're going to have a moment of weakness. You're going to break down at some point, and you are going to start using those drugs.
Either that, or you're going to break away from there and get out of there.
Exactly. Those are your only 2 options. That's it, is to fold and then start consuming the drugs, or get your stuff out and leave.
Get out.
Well, and the weaker always tear down the stronger. It always goes that way. I tried to teach my kids that when they were younger. My youngest daughter loved all the broken kids. So she'd bring home the broken kids because she wanted to fix them. But those broken kids would always turn on her, because broken people break other people. When they're triggered, they go off, they break other people. And she went through with a couple of kids turning on her. And she was devastated. And I said to her, the broken people always break people. You can't save the broken people. They need to save themselves. They need their resources. But you can't invest your life with these people, because at some point they're going to be hurting, and they're going to lash out at you because you're there. They lash out at the thing close. It's not that they're bad people. That's just how it works. And it took her many years to figure that out, after going being lashed out, by these broken people, because they will tear down the ones around them.
Yep.
Absolutely. And it takes a lot of mental strength to overcome that. And my hat's off to you, Judy, because you dealt with that for a really long time. And that same scenario that I just gave of the drug addicts is like essentially a metaphor for sort of like what you were going through. You were constantly being nagged at, you were constantly being hit, and you had to have the power to get over that. And that is very rare. I mean, Jerry just mentioned that he only knows of 20 people that have beaten schizophrenia. I mean, how many people have been reported to have schizophrenia? I feel like that is a very, very low number of people.
It's very hard. I've learned, Jerry probably knows this as well, it's very hard to get people who are mentally ill to do the work that it requires to get well. The other thing is this: most people admit that mentally ill, at some point, it becomes their identity. And they thrive in it to some degree. They live in it. That's what they are. It becomes their whole identity. So if they give up that identity, a lot of them, I met, they have to give up disability, which is money. They've got to go against their counselors, the mental health system. They don't want to go in and tell their mental health, people that they figured out another way. Like, I went back to visit my psychiatrist 10, 12 years after I was healed. And I couldn't tell. He asked me, well, how'd you do it? I couldn't tell him, because he would have thought I was crazy. I can't say, well, I was battling demons. How do you tell a psychiatrist that?
Yeah.
So people who are mentally ill, how do you go against that system? They get sucked into it. They become a victim of it. And then it becomes their identity. And I find it very hard to convince them there's another way. I know a woman in my social group who has depression problems and other problems. And when anybody tries to help her and explain to her that, yes, she could overcome, she says her answer is, I'm too broken. Don't you understand? I'm too broken. And my answer is, well, how come you're so special? What made you so special that you're so broken? I was more broken than you were broken. I got up and walked out of it. But she wants, being broken is her whole identity. She gets a new psychiatrist every 6 months. She gets a new drug. She gets, training. She gets this. She gets her money. It's her life. And she's decided that's her life. She's accepted it. I could not accept it. I wanted something out of life. I wanted to be well. I wanted to have a career. I wanted to have a family. I wasn't willing to give that up for nobody. And that's why I fought, because I knew that I had things to do. I knew that there was a job for me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew there was a purpose for my life. And
what you're doing now is part of that purpose.
Yeah, and it took me 50 years to figure all this out and learn all these things about the spiritual realm. And when people come and talk to me about what's going on, and women come to me and say, well, I'm kind of depressed, and I said, well, just let me tell you about your depression, and I can explain it to her in detail. You're depressed. You got a little bit of despondency. You got some self-hatred. You got some self-loathing. You got this and that. She goes, how do you know? I said, because I've been there. And these demons, and Jerry will probably attest to this, these demons travel in groups. I call them the cousins. If you've got one, you've probably got 5, or maybe 3 or 4, but you don't have just one, because they come as groups and they hit you from every side, so that when you find someone who's depressed, they've been beat down from several different angles. And but it's taken me a lifetime to learn all this, and I've studied spiritual healing, and I've studied the spiritual realm and spiritual warfare and all this stuff, and that goes all the way into Nephilim. It goes into what's going on in our society now, and how our society is being changed and the thinking's being changed and the warfare that's coming at us from every level. I understand it. I lived it. I see it. It's so clear to me. And when COVID first came, probably within, I don't know, maybe a month of when it really first hit, and then they began to make plans of how they were going to deal with it. And I said to my husband, I said, I can see what they're doing. I can see what this is about. This is about a slow destruction. First, they're going to destroy small businesses. They're going to destroy children. They're going to destroy education. They're going to destroy business. They're going to, because I could see it, because I know the spiritual realm. I could see what they were doing.
Spiritual war.
Yeah. So that's the gift out of having been a schizophrenic. You get that gift, and in some ways, Ryder, to be honest with you, I wouldn't give up the experience for anything. For what I got in return for getting through that.
Because it made you who you are, yeah.
Yep, made me who I am.
Yeah, but really quickly before I let you guys go, I had Raven and Top Lobster from the Nephilim Death Squad on my show, and they were talking about this gentleman named Adrija Puharaj that would, I think you were on their show before, Jerry. I don't know if you remember or not, but he was essentially putting like these tooth implants in people, like the old school cavity fillings that are like metal fillings.
Mm-hmm. Melograms or whatever they're called, melograms.
Yeah, he was putting them into people's teeth, and then these people were going around and hearing like voices and picking up like radio signals like through their teeth, through the implant in their tooth. And I was like, well, could this not be like some kind like to induce, to open up the door for hearing voices and like schizophrenia? Could this not be like a part of that? Like, and this is proven in the Lucille Ball from I Love Lucy. She literally stopped the Japanese insurgents because she had a metal tooth implant in her tooth, and she picked up radio transmissions and she relayed that to the military, and the military went in and stopped the Japanese insurgents.
Well,
I've heard of that. When they turn up the power, the wattage high enough, a lot of people will start hearing the radio frequency.
So then the filling is a receiver.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, but the wattage has to go way up. But yeah, it'll happen. The crystal radios, it's the same thing. Little crystals. But yeah, they turn that wattage up high enough, you'll start hearing it.
Wow.
And I just thought that was like so interesting, because we kind of started out the conversation here today about, and this was research that they had done, the Nephilim Death Squad has done. I thought that I would mention that really quickly, because we were talking about in the beginning like how this stuff happens and the window to it and how it's like induced. And I thought maybe that could be something for someone to look into, like, some schizophrenic patients, like how many of them have like this metal dental implant in them, and because they don't do them anymore. You can't get a metal implant anymore. It's all like it's the white like paste or whatever they call it. Yeah, the clear fillings.
Well, like I was saying, the voices run specific patterns. Okay, if they don't run those patterns, then it's something else.
Yeah. Well, guys,
I'm sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this idea of schizophrenia and voices is in the same wheelhouse as, and this is hard to explain to people, it's in the same wheelhouse as the Nephilim. It's all spiritual warfare. Nephilim are spiritual warfare. Schizophrenia is just one more leg of that. It's like one more arm of that octopus of what the rulers of evil are doing. That's one arm they throw out. The Nephilim is another arm. Bigfoot and that stuff, that's another arm. There's many, many arms coming at us. And I'm not sure people understand that. It's hard sometimes to make that connection from schizophrenia as being part of this whole big warfare that's going on in the world. But but it is.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's spiritual warfare. And the psychiatric mafia is trying to get you to believe that it's a physical problem. That's why they don't have any solutions. That's why they don't have any cures. That's why they say it's a lifelong malady, because they don't have any cures, because they don't know what it is, and they're not willing to accept what it is.
Well, and the other thing is, it's more than just getting rid of demons. It's getting rid of the junk in us, their food. They feed on our anger and our bitterness and our unfood. You clean that stuff out, they got nothing to feed on.
Well, that's where the Mace energy method comes in. It's great at getting rid of that buried up trauma. One session will get rid of major trauma, and it's not there anymore. It's just gone. There's more information on that on my website also at jerrymarzinsky.com. I've never seen anything work like it.
Well, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. It was an amazing conversation. And thank you so much, Judy, for your strength and your mental fortitude. And you were able to get over that and then write a book about this. Where can people find your book on this?
I have several. Well, the book that I had published with Doubleday is out of print, so nobody's going to find that. I bought up every lost copy in the world when I could. I'm working on a book now about it. It's called The Terrible Years, and that'll go into print probably in about 2 months. But I have 2 other books on warfare, and they can find them under my name on Amazon, or I have a website called Strategies for Overcomers, and they can find it there, strategiesforovercomers.com. And this one I just wrote. This was, what I learned in the pit, what I learned from suffering, basically. And some interesting stuff. And they're both Christian books, for people who lean that way or don't, so that people know, they're from a Christian worldview.
Yeah, I would highly recommend people check out these books. I'll put the link in the description for you to check out these on Amazon Prime. Jerry, where can people find more about you and read your article?
Well, this book here, if I can get it in there, Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind. It's written by myself and Sherry Sweeney, who had an experience similar to Judy's. And we put this together because we felt people needed to know what these voices were and how they operated and where they came from, that they weren't hallucinations. So this is a story of how we reached that conclusion. And you can get that on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, or you can get it over Amazon.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. The link to Jerry's website is in the description of this video. And for everyone else, thanks so much for being in the chat, being here and listening. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel and the algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. And we'll see you guys next time. Guys, stay with me.